All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon. In this video, we're going to talk about Terence Crawford, Errol Spence Jr., and a brief prediction given out by one of the greatest welterweights that I've seen in my lifetime, the great Sugar Ray Leonard. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon. In this video, we are going to talk about the 147-pound division and the biggest fight that there has been in a very, very long time, and a prediction for the winner of the fight from the guy that fought in the last fight that could be remotely considered this big in the welterweight division. All right, sorry about that. Had an interruption with my dogs barking. So we're going to talk about Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford and the prediction, brief prediction that came from one of the fighters that was in the last mega 147-pound fight. No, actually not the last. There was Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao, and also there was at a time Oscar De La Hoya and Pernell Whitaker. However, my personal opinion is that this fight in the welterweight division is the biggest or the most important fight in the welterweight division since Sugar Ray Leonard fought Thomas the Hitman Hearns way back. I do believe it was 1982. I think it was September 16th, 1982, if I got the date correct. But Sugar Ray Leonard gives a brief prediction about what he thinks is going to happen. Now, Sugar Ray Leonard, it's wild, man, because if I was Errol Spence Jr., I would be like, man, Sugar Ray Leonard, what do I got to do to impress you? If you guys do not know the history between Errol Spence Jr. and Sugar Ray Leonard, it is a very, very interesting one. First things first, if I recall correctly, Sugar Ray Leonard was a hero of Errol Spence Jr. and a guy that Errol Spence Jr. sought out to see if he would help manage him early in his career. That was not something that Sugar Ray Leonard was interested in, so that did not come to fruition. But he was a hero of Sugar Ray Leonard. Sugar Ray Leonard was a hero of Errol Spence Jr. early in his career or early in his lifetime, and a fighter that he looked forward to. However, almost every time that Errol Spence Jr. is in a big fight, or at least the times that Sugar Ray Leonard has been asked about how Errol Spence Jr. will perform in a big fight, he always picks the other guy. So the first time that it happened was with Mikey Garcia, and people asked Sugar Ray Leonard. Now, in Sugar Ray Leonard's defense, these questions have always been asked of him when he's been in a crowd of people with a bunch of cameras in his face. He's getting the superstar treatment and he's not giving it a lot of thought. He's just kind of looking over real quick and answering a question, you know, politely answering a question with a mic in his face or with a phone in his face. But with Mikey Garcia, he said, I think Mikey Garcia is going to win the fight. And when asked, well, why do you think Mikey Garcia is going to win in that fight? He says, well, because it's Mikey. And then today, well, a video came out where Sugar Ray Leonard is asked, you know, what do you want to see this fight between Terence Crawford and Errol Spence? And Sugar Ray Leonard says, yeah, absolutely. Hopefully it can happen. Yeah, we'd love it to happen. And they said, well, who do you edge out in that fight? And Sugar Ray Leonard says his first reaction is Terence Crawford. He said, but I like both guys. I like both guys. But the clear answer that he gave in who he would pick to that win in his first reaction was Terence Crawford. So I listened to that. I was like, wow, man, Errol Spence Jr. cannot catch a break. Cannot catch a break with Sugar Ray Leonard to save his life. Now, I will tell you, though, that is definitely an opinion that I respect. Sugar Ray Leonard is somebody that understands the sport of boxing without a doubt. He's a legend. Not only is he's a former commentator, so he watched fights and called fights on HBO in the late 1980s, early 1990s. He is definitely a world man. I personally think is the best welterweight best fighter in the welterweight division that I've seen, with the exception of maybe Tommy Hearns. But hey, man, he got that decision over, he got that fight over Tommy Hearns because he was able to knock Tommy Hearns out when he was getting knocked out. The dude definitely knows his boxing. And so I'm not taking what he says lightly at all. Now, I think maybe one of the reasons that he may like Terence Crawford over Errol Spence Jr. is one of the reasons that, it's for the same reason that a lot of people take Terence Crawford over Errol Spence Jr. I think it could be the love or the appreciation of the athleticism of Terence Crawford, the hand speed of Terence Crawford, the explosiveness of Terence Crawford, the multiple dimensions or ways that Terence Crawford goes about winning fights. Where, if you had to say, look at one of the biggest middleweight fights, and I'm positive the biggest middleweight fight that has taken place in a long time since the early 1980s was a fight with Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvelous Marvin Hagler, right? And I think that there's, some, comparisons that can be made with the style of Sugar Ray Leonard and the style of Marvelous Marvin Hagler. You have Marvelous Marvin Hagler, who was the bigger guy who was fighting out of the southpaw stance, right? Very, very solid, fundamental fighter that, will brawl with you and, and go at it and will come at you. And then you have the smaller guy moving up in weight in Sugar Ray Leonard with the fast hands and all of that good stuff. And Sugar Ray Leonard wound up, winning the fight over Marvelous Marvin Hagler, even though a lot of people say, nah, it was a robbery and thought Marvin Hagler won the fight. So it may be a style type of thing that he likes about Terence Crawford, but again, he did not get into any great detail about it. And the way that my take on it is that opinion should most definitely be respected. I see what I see with Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford. I see Errol Spence Jr. winning. That's the way that I see it. That's the style of fighter that I think is the most difficult to overcome. And one thing that I would say I think is the difference between Errol and Terence versus Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvelous Marvin Hagler is that Marvelous Marvin Hagler was the fighter that looked like he was getting older, had some problems with John the Beast Mugabe in the fight before he fought Sugar Ray Leonard. So, looked like he may have been slipping a little bit. However, in this situation, it's I think it may be the reverse. You have Errol Spence Jr., who is 4 years younger than Terence Crawford, and is actually looking fresher in his last fight than he looked in the previous several fights. And Terence Crawford, who at the time of the fight, if it takes place, will be pushing 35 years old and will be most definitely the older of the two fighters. But whatever the case is, man, count that as a big vote for Terence Crawford and a prediction that really does mean a lot because, the man knows his stuff. However, take it with a little bit of grain of salt there, because in the same situation where he's being asked questions off the cuff about the fight taking place, when he's got a bunch of, cameras in his face and phones in his face asking him off the cuff, he predicted that Mikey Garcia would beat Errol Spence Jr. And you see what happened with that particular circumstance. Did not turn out anything like Sugar Ray Leonard thought it would. But anyway, that's my take on the matter. You let me know in the comment section what you think. And with that, I'm out. Peace.